The house on Long Cliff Road looked like a photograph of ordinary life. Bed made tight, coffee half-finished, handbag placed neatly as if Julie would be back in minutes. Nothing screamed danger. Nothing warned of violence. And yet, behind an upstairs door that shouldn't have been closed, a quiet, controlled murder had already happened. No broken window, no force lock, no frantic struggle stamped into the room. Just silence, and a woman who never got the chance to fight back. In a neighborhood where people trusted routine more than fear, Julie Pacey was killed in the middle of the day by someone who didn't need to rush, didn't need to smash their way in, and didn't need to leave a trace. Julie Pacey's life had the comforting shape of stability, one of those families people pointed to as normal in the best possible way. She'd grown up in Granville, Lincolnshire, the kind of quiet middle-class place where families stay close, where neighbors recognize each other's cars, where the rhythm of the week is predictable enough to feel safe. She married her childhood sweetheart, Andrew, and after 18 years together, they lived with their 2 children, an older daughter in her early teens and a younger son, in a 4-bedroom home on Long Cliff Road, one of the nicer streets in the area. Their neighborhood wasn't flashy, but it was proud of itself. Tidy gardens, friendly chats, children who could still play outside without everyone checking the windows every 5 minutes. Andrew ran his own plumbing business and spent his days driving across Grantham and nearby towns. Julie worked part-time at a nursery a few miles away, and the work suited her. Looking after people came naturally, so naturally that after school, most weekdays, she also watched a neighbor's young daughter until the parents finished work. It wasn't a favor she did once or twice. It was routine, steady, dependable, the sort of thing you do when people trust you completely. And trust mattered in Julie's world. People described her as kind and reliable, the kind of woman who could make someone feel welcome without making show of it. A safe person, the type who assumes the best first. That kindness, as the story unfolds, may have been exactly what made her vulnerable. On Monday, September 26th, 1994, everything begins with the same smooth normality. Mild, early autumn weather, bright enough to still feel like summer. Andrew left early for work, heading to a plumbing job. The kids went off to school. Julie drove to the nursery for her shift around 10 a.m. Finishing at 2 p.m. afterward, she visited her parents briefly, then went into town. By 2:30, she was seen shopping. By 2:45, a neighbor noticed her pulling into the driveway in her Audi. After that, the timeline becomes a blank space, one of the cruelest things an unsolved murder leaves behind. At 4:15, Julie's daughter came home from school and walked into a silence that didn't fit. She called for her mom. No answer. She called again, louder. Still nothing. She checked the garden, then the back door, locked from the inside. That detail didn't just feel odd, it felt wrong. Julie couldn't have left that way. Unease became fear. She went upstairs, calling again, and noticed the bathroom door shut. When she tried the handle, it wouldn't open. It felt stuck. She pushed harder until it gave. Inside, Julie was on the bathroom floor. Her tights and underwear were around her knees. Her daughter's mind reached for the most innocent explanation first. Maybe she'd collapsed. Maybe she'd been taken ill. Panic. Shock. A child trying to wake a mother who wouldn't move. Paramedics arrived quickly and began CPR, but when they moved Julie's black sweater, they saw the marks. Deep, unmistakable bruising around her neck. It wasn't illness. It wasn't an accident. It was strangulation. And the house itself told investigators something chilling. This wasn't a messy crime. No smashed entry, no damaged locks, no forced window. The back door was bolted from the inside. Everything was tidy, calm, almost staged in its normality. Bed made, turquoise work overalls hanging neatly, coffee and a chocolate wrapper sitting like a pause button pressed mid-afternoon. Nail polish remover near her handbag, like she'd been about to fix something small, personal, ordinary. Those details didn't just show routine. They showed interruption. Julie had been home long enough to change, to settle, to exhale. Then, without warning, someone ended her life, fast, controlled, and close. The first question detectives faced wasn't, how did someone get in? It was, who did Julie let in? Because the scene didn't scream intrusion. It whispered familiarity. Everything about the house suggested Julie wasn't frightened when the door opened. No defensive injuries. No broken nails. No bruises on her arms from a struggle. Her careful manicure remained intact, which is one of those forensic details that sounds trivial until you realize what it implies. She never got the chance to claw, scratch, fight, or even properly react. Strangulation is intimate, physical, requiring proximity and time. It isn't something you do by accident. It's something you choose, and you keep choosing for long enough to finish. The fact Julie had no defensive wounds hinted at a terrifying possibility. Either she trusted the person completely, or she was taken by surprise so quickly that resistance was impossible. Then came the detail that made investigators narrow their eyes at the calendar. Julie was killed on a Monday, the one weekday when the neighbor's young daughter didn't come to Julie's house after school. On any other day, a child would have arrived around 3:15 p.m. On Monday, the house stayed empty. That doesn't prove planning, but makes coincidence feel less likely. Whoever did this didn't just strike in daylight. They struck on the day Julie would be alone. And suddenly, the unsettling encounter from 3 days earlier didn't feel like a random, odd moment anymore. On the Friday before Julie died, she'd been upstairs cleaning when the doorbell rang. Thinking it was the neighbor's child, she called out casually for them to come in, something people in safe neighborhoods do without thinking. But when Julie went downstairs, she froze. In her hallway stood a scruffy man she didn't recognize. She demanded to know why he was inside her home. He claimed he was lost and needed directions and said he'd only enter because he heard her tell him to come in. On paper, it could sound harmless. In reality, it left Julie shaken enough to tell her family about it. By chance, the neighbor's young daughter had seen the man enter the house and later pass her in the street. She got a clear look at him. That moment mattered because it anchored the man in reality, not imagination. Later witnesses would describe him with striking consistency. Average height, stocky build, ruddy weathered face, cheeks notably red. Mid-40s, wearing a checkered shirt and overalls, like a tradesman, like someone who belonged near building work, like someone you wouldn't challenge in a neighborhood with renovations nearby. Then another witness added a second scene that made the hair rise on investigators' necks. They said they saw Julie driving around 3:10 p.m. when a man matching that same description stepped into the road. Julie braked suddenly, lifted her hand in apology, and drove on. The man walked past Julie's house, then turned around and headed back toward it. The witness didn't stay to see what happened next. They couldn't confirm if he followed Julie inside. But what they could confirm was the unsettling pattern. The same overalls man appeared in Julie's orbit again on the day she died, near the exact window of time when she would have been alone. Police explored the possibility he was a builder connected to renovation work at the end of Long Cliff Road. They visited sites, spoke to foremen and workers, circulated descriptions. No one claimed him. That raised two options, both bad. Either he wasn't connected to the work at all, or he was using the overalls as camouflage, knowing nobody questions a man dressed like he belongs. And then there was the one missing item that didn't fit the random intruder story. Julie's wristwatch, bought just 2 months earlier in Paris, distinctive and believed to be unusual in the UK. Nothing else was taken. Not electronics, not cash, not jewelry scattered around the home. Just that watch. That kind of selective theft can mean trophy taking, something personal, something portable, something that ties the killer back to the victim in a private way. For years, the case hovered in that dreadful space where the pieces are visible, but the picture refuses to assemble. A controlled daylight strangulation, a quiet house, a possible prowler, a missing watch, and a killer who walked away unseen. With time, the case didn't fade, it sharpened into legend. In Lincolnshire, the man in overalls became more than a suspect description. He became a symbol of how someone can stand in plain sight and still remain unknown. The image was vivid enough that people began spotting him everywhere. Parks, shops, streets. Reports surfaced of a man matching the description lingering around Grantham in the days between the Friday intrusion and the Monday murder. One shop assistant remembered him for how he invaded personal space, standing too close, tense, confrontational in that quiet way that makes you feel watched rather than threatened. Not openly violent, just unsettling enough to stick in your memory. And that's the thing about these cases. Once fear enters a community, memory becomes both weapon and weakness. People replay moments. They recheck faces. They question instincts they ignored at the time. But memory alone can't convict anyone. Investigators needed something more, something that doesn't blur with time. They needed forensics. Years passed. Evidence sat. Technology moved forward. Hope, which had thinned, returned in a new shape in 2014 when police announced they'd built an almost complete DNA profile from the crime scene, nearly 2 decades after Julie died. That kind of development can feel like a door opening in a room that's been locked for years. Families cling to it. Communities whisper about it. People who once stayed silent sometimes feel brave enough to speak. But when the profile was checked against national databases, the result landed like ice water. No match. No one in the system. No one arrested in the UK between 1995 and 2014 who carried that DNA, which meant the killer could be someone who had never been caught for anything else, or someone who committed crimes before DNA databases became routine, or someone who left the country, or someone already dead. The DNA didn't end the story. It only proved the worst part. That Julie's killer had managed to move through life without being officially pinned to a single serious offense, at least not one recorded in the database. Investigators renewed appeals. They asked for the smallest details. Someone remembering a man with red cheeks and overalls who didn't belong. A blue BMW, possibly a 5 Series, seen parked in Julie's driveway around the time of the murder, a face that looked familiar but never quite clicked. That BMW lead, too, drifted into silence. No driver came forward. No firm identification. Just another shadow parked in the driveway of a dead woman's home. From the beginning, Julie's husband Andrew was ruled out. Solid alibi. Working across town, nothing placing him near the house. That mattered, because in many domestic murders, the spouse becomes the central suspect. Here, the investigation pointed outward, toward a stranger who may have rehearsed entry, tested Julie's boundaries, and returned on the one day she'd be alone. And then came the most surreal twist, one that sounds like fiction until you realize how it can happen when a suspect description becomes iconic. In 1994, the BBC program Crime Watch recreated Julie's murder. A 32-year-old man named Steve Watson applied to play the killer and was cast. When the episode aired, people were stunned by how closely Steve resembled the composite sketch of the suspect. For some viewers, it wasn't just similarity, it felt like recognition. Whispers began. Accusations floated. Steve brushed it off as a bizarre coincidence, because surely no killer would volunteer to play himself on television, right? But coincidence doesn't care about what feels sensible. In 2015, Crime Watch re-aired the episode. Steve, now in his 50s, was recognized again. Panic returned. People called police, claiming they had just walked past Julie's killer. Steve was arrested, and his DNA was taken. For a moment, it must have felt like the case was finally collapsing into a name. Then the results came back. No match. Steve Watson wasn't the killer. His life was yanked into a nightmare because he happened to resemble a ghost the town never stopped seeing. Police acknowledged the resemblance was remarkable, but the science didn't lie. And that left the case where it had always been. Julie Pacey strangled in a spotless home, in daylight, with no struggle, no forced entry, and a suspect who may have walked in simply because she trusted the knock at her door. Even now, the case carries a strange, unsettling atmosphere, like a house that still feels quiet long after the lights are turned back on. Not mystical in a supernatural sense, but mystical in the way a crime can seem to defy ordinary logic. Because everything about Julie's death is wrapped in contradictions. It happened in the afternoon, not the dead of night. In a safe neighborhood, not a hidden alley. In a tidy home, not a chaotic scene of burglary. And yet the killer vanished as if the street itself swallowed him. No loud argument heard by neighbors. No crashing furniture. No frantic screams reported. Just an upstairs door that wouldn't open, and a daughter who had to push her way into the moment her world ended. The most haunting detail isn't the coffee cup or the made bed, though those are painful in their normality. It's the calmness, the stillness after the act, the absence of disorder. It's as if the killer stepped into Julie's life like a visitor, carried out a private, deliberate act, and then walked out, leaving the home looking almost respectful. That kind of order can feel eerie because it suggests a mind that wasn't panicked. A person who didn't fear being interrupted. Someone who believed the schedule, the street, the day itself belonged to him. The Friday encounter deepens that eerie feeling because it reads like a test, a rehearsal, a moment where the killer, if it was the same man, learned the layout, watched Julie's reaction, understood how easily her kindness could be used against her. I'm lost. It's the simplest excuse in the world, a line that could be delivered with a harmless shrug. But the wrong person can turn it into a key. And then Monday, the one day the after-school child wouldn't be there. The one day the house would stay quiet. If this was planned, it wasn't genius-level planning. It was the kind of planning that's even more frightening because it's so simple. Observe, wait, return when the risk is low. The missing watch adds another layer of dark symbolism. A watch is time made tangible. It measures minutes. It sits on the pulse. It's intimate. Taking only the watch can feel like the killer taking proof of control. Taking something Julie bought for herself, something linked to her identity, her independence, her life beyond that street. And because it was from Paris and distinctive, it becomes almost like a signature, something the killer might keep, revisit, relive. Trophy taking doesn't always mean sexual assault. Sometimes it's about possession. Sometimes it's about wanting the victim to remain yours in a private way long after the body is found. The DNA development in 2014 is another strange kind of modern haunting, because it gives hope, almost complete profile, then offers nothing. No match, no name, just confirmation that the killer existed in a measurable way, a person with blood and skin and cells, not just a story, yet still unreachable. And then the Crime Watch twist, which feels like the universe playing a cruel joke on everyone involved. A man who resembled the sketch so strongly that the public convinced itself it had to mean something, only for DNA to pull the rug away. It demonstrates how desperate people become for a face to attach to fear. When the unknown becomes too heavy, people start seeing the suspect everywhere. They start believing in patterns that might not be real. The mind tries to finish the story because living with an unfinished ending feels intolerable. That's why Julie Pacey's case lingers. Because it's not just a murder mystery. It's a mystery of access. How someone entered a normal woman's life so smoothly that she couldn't even defend herself, then left without cracking the surface of the home. A locked back door. No forced entry. A bathroom door that held the truth behind it. And a figure in overalls, red-cheeked and ordinary-looking, who blended into the background of a working town like he was never there at all. The hardest part to accept in cases like this is not the brutality. It's the simplicity. A woman comes home, changes clothes, sips coffee, maybe fixes her nails, and then she's dead. That's the terror. How little disturbance it can take to erase a life. And it forces an uncomfortable conversation about what communities, systems, and even our everyday habits refuse to confront until it's too late. First, there's the dangerous comfort of safe neighborhoods. Longcliffe Road sounded like the kind of place where people believed violence belonged elsewhere. Doors get left unlocked. People call out, "Come in," without checking who rang the bell. That culture of trust is human and understandable. Julie wasn't reckless. She was normal for where she lived. But the case exposes how predators exploit exactly that. Not chaos, but routine. Not darkness, but daylight. Then there's the chilling possibility of escalation. The Friday intrusion as a failed attempt, followed by Monday as the completed act. If that's what happened, it means the killer didn't arrive fully formed at the door on Monday. He may have been circling, building courage, rehearsing. That raises the condemning question. How many people like this walk among ordinary streets until the day they decide not to stop themselves? The investigation also shows the limits of policing in the mid-90s, especially in a quiet area. No CCTV networks on every corner. Limited forensic tools compared to today. Witness sightings that can't be anchored to hard proof. Without fingerprints, without a clear trail, the case bleeds time. And time is a gift to killers. Even the later DNA breakthrough, as powerful as it sounds, reveals a brutal reality. DNA isn't magic if the person isn't in the database. A near-complete profile with no match is like having the outline of a key, but no lock to try it in. It can also be a reminder of how many violent offenders never get caught, how many move through life without ever being arrested, or how many die before technology catches up. The public likes to believe monsters are always visible, always repeat offenders, always eventually found. Julie's case suggests something darker. Sometimes there's just one person who got away clean enough once, and that was enough. The Crime Watch misunderstanding, though dramatic, also condemns our tendency to turn true crime into spectacle. When a resemblance can trigger panic and accusations decades later, it shows how quickly people want a villain to point at. And when that villain turns out to be innocent, it doesn't just damage him. It distracts from the real killer still out there, still unnamed. True crime storytelling can keep cases alive, but can also create distortions. People chasing faces instead of facts. Most condemning of all is what Julie's murder says about offender confidence. Strangulation, in a tidy home, in daylight, with no obvious struggle, suggests control and familiarity with risk. The killer either knew Julie's habits or knew how to manipulate them. And the fact he never came forward, never cleared himself after being publicly described, only thickened suspicion. Innocent people with nothing to hide usually don't stay silent when their face becomes nationally linked to a murder. Silence here feels like strategy. Julie's story forces one final, bitter realization. The most dangerous moment for many victims isn't the scream, the break-in, the dramatic fight. It's the quiet decision to open a door, to trust the wrong person for a single minute, in a home that should have been safe. And when a case remains unsolved for decades, the offender gets something else besides escape. They get the community's uncertainty. They get to live inside the question mark. Julie's family doesn't get that luxury. They live with the answer. She was murdered without ever being given the name. Julie Pacey's home held on a normal life, right up until the moment it didn't. Coffee cooling, bed made, silence sitting politely in every room. And then a locked bathroom door hid the truth. A controlled, deliberate strangulation by someone who walked in as if they belonged. Decades later, the overalls man is still faceless, proof that the quietest crimes can echo the loudest.